It's the story of an American held in a dark Venezuelan prison.
Then all of a sudden they all kind of lined up. They pointed their guns at me. And this is the point where I thought, I'm going to die today.
I'm Becky Bruce. I spent a year working on Hope in Darkness, which now has more than 2 million downloads. Find it on kslpodcast.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
In today's episode of Project Recovery,
I wanted to learn how to be a good mom. I wanted stability for them, but I couldn't get sober again to get myself back in treatment. I started going to jail at least once a month. I think I had 12 booking photos in the matter of a couple months.
make sure you listen to the end. Find us on Facebook at Project Recovery. We'll have that and much more coming up. Hey, welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction, but more importantly, it's about recovery. And it's brought to you by our friends at knowyourscript.org. They used to be use only as directed, but they broadened it up. They're getting a little more aggressive, and they want us to take ownership in our own bodies. And that means knowing our script. That means knowing our script when we talk to our doctors, when we talk to our daughters, when we talk to our kids, when we talk to loved ones. And Dr. Matt, knowing your script is important. Why?
So that you are a good consumer of your own health care, man. You need to know what you're taking and to build some confidence to talk to your physician. Maybe there are alternatives. You know, just because they prescribed it doesn't mean that's the only way to manage pain. So it's a good idea to get in the habit of talking to your doc about the prescription.
Also, and real quick before we get to our guest and kind of the beginning of the show, Dr. Matt, how important, now this is going to seem silly, but I know a lot of people don't. How important is it to be honest with your doctor?
Well, I mean, no matter how smart your doc is, they don't know how to read your mind. So sometimes they may know you're kind of fibbing, but they may not call you on it. You got to tell your doctor the truth. If you're struggling with addiction, if you've had problems in the past, even if it's not with opioids, if you've had troubles with alcohol or other things, you need to talk to them about that. They can be your best friend in guiding you through that process only if they have all the right information.
You know, it's amazing to me that even when I was in recovery, how many times I tried to BS the therapist, how many times I tried to BS people who knew that I was BSing, but I still tried to do it. And I think that goes back to the addict mind, the addict behavior. Sometimes we think we're smarter than everybody else. Or
you're just in the habit of downplaying everything, just making everything seem less than it was. But if you don't tell your doctor the truth about what's going on, how can they help you, right?
And that goes for your therapist too, because a lot of times, you know, you're sitting there and there's got to be more to this story because what you're selling isn't adding up. And until we get to the real bottom and the layers of what's going on, we can't really begin to fix and heal. And so sometimes it's just a waste of time. So make sure when you're talking to your doctor and your therapist, you're being as honest as you can be. I say that because sometimes it's a little bit tougher, but honesty is always the best policy. That's what we say here.
We run an honest program.
So Dr. Matt, you know, in the beginning of the podcast, we like to check in with each other. And I wanted to say something because, you know, we've been doing this for almost 2 years now, coming up on March. It really is a family. And all the hard stuff that we've had to hear during this podcast has really, you know, touched me. And I know it's touched you. But last week was the first time I ever saw you get emotional. And as someone who's in this world, I go, wow, that's cool. Because when you're emotional, you're raw. And I really, really liked it because a lot of times we don't see therapists get emotional and raw. And I thought that was a very cool experience. And I want to say thank you for sharing with us.
Well, I was sharing something personal, and that's a little different than talking about, you know, the clinical work. And it's not that doesn't get emotional too sometimes, but you learn to think about things and talk about them in a professional way, even the hard things. But, you know, last week we were talking about gratitude and gratitude in our own lives and the holiday of Thanksgiving and how most of us kind of missed out on being with our family. And so, yeah, things get kind of emotional. I'm fortunate to have a wonderful family that I grew up with. And sometimes when I think about that, it touches me deeply as it does everyone else who has people in their lives they appreciate. And I appreciate the fact that we get to do this podcast together, and you're always very open and honest about your thoughts and feelings. And I think that is what brings this community of listeners together.
Sometimes I've been accused of being too honest and too open. Like when I walk into a room and somebody will say, hey, that's the guy on TV. And I'll go, now I'm known for the guy as the mugshot, and sometimes people are like, hey, you don't need to do that. But that's my way to kind of break the ice and put us all on an even playing field. But, I want to talk about the gratitude letter, because when I sat down to the computer the other day and I wrote kind of a gratitude letter to you, it didn't start out as a gratitude letter, Dr. Matt. It started out as a post to promote the podcast, to get people to go download it. And as I'm writing it, I started thinking of all these things. And I thought about, my boss having to let me go, who's also one of my great friends, who's hired me twice in the industry and is always pulling for me, had to let me go. And I thought to myself, man, I'm sitting there thinking how bad this is for me. How bad is it for her that she has to sit down and look at one of her friends, somebody who she put her faith in, and I let her down, and now she has to fire me. And then I have the gumption to ask her for a new job in the same sentence, and then she goes, I need a doctor. And then I've got to call my doctor friend who I was doing a podcast with before, but I got a DUI. So I went to rehab. So that podcast was scratched. And now I got to call him and pitch him on another idea. So I was writing it down. It really did fill my heart. It also made it real personal that I was actually putting it to text. I didn't do it on write. I wrote it in a post, but I think that's something similar. And then I put it out there, and it did feel wonderful. And so thank you. And if I haven't said it enough, thank you for doing this podcast. I'm grateful for Josh. I'm grateful for KSL. I'm grateful for Bonneville. I am really grateful for all things that are going in my life. I can tell you right now, my life is 3 times harder, but 100% better. I'm not making as much money. I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul, but I'm getting it all done, and I'm getting it done with a sober head, and it feels amazing. It really does. You know that cake that they go almost better than sex cake?
Yeah.
This is like an almost better than sex feeling. You know what I mean? Almost. Yeah. I'm going to throw the almost
Let's
in
be
there.
honest.
Yeah.
I appreciate you, man. And I thought that was a very honest, very authentic, I should say, post that you made. And I appreciate you. And honestly, getting to do this with you every week is one of the highlights of what I'm doing professionally in my life right now. I get to do a lot of fun things through the university and through my private practice and elsewhere. And this is probably the highlight of what I do every week. I really look forward to it, partly because I get to work with you and you're my good friend. We both get to work with Josh, and he's like sexy Jesus. So we like having Josh on the show, and he makes everything click. So it's a good time. And honestly, it's that willingness to ask your boss in the same sentence you're getting fired if you can do a new show that's gotten us here, and that persistence that you have. And I think it's a great example for all of us, your optimism.
Oh, thank you. And that letter was honest, because it was riddled with grammatical errors. I know it was. And I'm a horrible speller. You can ask producer Josh. I'm the king of the ... Does it need a question mark? Does it need a comma? Does it need a hyphen? Screw it. Let's put in a ... and go to the next sentence. So I'm going to ... this first part of the podcast and get to our guest today. Heidi Lund, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for opening up like that. It made it really easy to kind of step into this.
Okay, so I want to let everybody know a little bit about Heidi. This is the first time we've ever talked, but I know your story because I did a gala, a fundraiser for the Family Support Center, and that's what you're a part of. And we're going to get to that in just a bit. We're going to find out how you got to the Family Support Center. But before we get started, you don't come on this podcast if you don't have a story. So where does the story of Heidi begin?
So a little bit about me. So I'm 37 and I have 2 kids. But I grew up in Kearns. My dad was killed when I was younger. He got electrocuted on the job. And so it was me and my brother in the beginning. My mom got married at a really young age to my dad. He got killed when I was 3 years old. And my mom's way of coping was turning to drugs. So she got into drugs when I was really young and continued through her addiction. Basically, she's still in an addiction to this day. So I grew up around kind of a dysfunctional family. My mom had 2 other kids. So I have an older brother, Derek, and then I have 2 younger sisters. And my 2 younger sisters are by a different dad. So he was killed, and my mom got really heavy into drugs, and I ended up kind of following in her footsteps. The first time I ever used a substance, I think I was 11 years old. By 12 years old, I was a full-blown meth addict.
Wow. I mean, for those who don't know and they're listening to this podcast, meth and 12-year-olds usually don't go hand in hand. I mean, that's not something that comes right out of the gate. Usually there's, well,
I don't think most 11, 12-year-olds are going to have access to something like meth. They might have alcohol or weed as an access point. But I guess that's because of the household you grew up in that people were doing. And let me ask you this, like a lot of adults, there might be a lot of people coming in and out of the house using. Was that your experience growing up?
Yes. So like when I was younger, I didn't really know of a different lifestyle besides that. And I used to kind of blame my mom for it. And really she didn't grow up any better. So I understand that now. In my addiction, I didn't understand it.
We grow up learning coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
And we learn our coping mechanisms from the adults in our life. And a lot of, we really don't really comprehend the fact that our first few years of life are a lot of heavy learning about how to cope with stress and anxiety and depression and things like that. And so if your mom grew up in a less functional household and maybe modeled to her were poor coping skills, then it makes sense when she had the stressor of losing her husband with 2 young kids that she might fall back on those and then model similar things to you. Is that kind of the generational?
It's exactly how it went. It's exactly. And I think the first time I ever tried meth, I tried it by myself because I wanted to understand what this drug was that everyone was so consumed by. I mean, someone would walk into our house and they'd have their whole life together, and within 6 months, they're selling us their property.
And that's got to be mind blowing for an 11-year-old. And I mean, I'm still taken back by a 12-year-old being addicted to meth. What does a 12-year-old addicted to meth look like?
So I assumed, or I thought I looked pretty hot as a 12-year-old addicted to meth. It was a secret. I was one of those people when I was using young that I didn't use with around people. It started off by myself, and then I just started stealing it from my mom. She never confronted me on it. I assumed that she knew or had suspicions, but she didn't want to realize that's what was happening. But our life was so chaotic. It was just like the regular thing there. I guess how to explain it. It wasn't no big.
Was it a household where a lot of adults came and used at the household, kind of friends, quote unquote, of your mom? And so
definitely.
Lack of
Did you still try to go to school? Were you still required to do the things that?
In the beginning, I did try to go to school. In the beginning, and actually, I did really well at school because my homework was done like a week in advance because I was at home. So I mean, in the beginning, it worked pretty well. It never stays working well, I don't think, with any substance.
That's the thing that blows my mind about meth, and not to put meth on blast, but any drug, you know what I mean? But all the information we know about meth, and hear me now, somebody's going to be trying meth for the first time today. And I will guarantee you this, and I'll go to my grave with this guarantee. Nobody has ever won the game of meth.
Never.
Never. You know what I mean? Meth always gets the best of you. At first, you think it's your friend. At first, you think it's helping you out. Now, I'm not speaking of experience because I've never done meth, but I've known so many people that go, no, it could help me be a super mom. It gives me more hours in the day. It gives me the energy. It gives me the focus. But by the end of it, and you could say this along with any kind of alcohol, drug, or whatever, it strips you of everything that you love.
Yep.
And it wins every time. Single time.
And I think the first time anyone tries meth, it's a good experience usually. The feeling is amazing, and you're constantly chasing that same feeling, and you'll never get it after that. So
you're full-blown addict at 12 with meth. Where does your story go from there?
I continued to use for a long time. So with my family, we sold drugs. And so that was the fast money, the fast life. With that came a lot of nice things. And I think we were under the perception, as long as everything looked good on the outside, then nobody would know what's going on the inside.
Was that the case?
Yeah, definitely. Like, we had the nicest clothes. Like, we always had stuff to eat. We didn't lack anything besides the nurturing parent.
When you were in like junior high school, starting that addiction process, were you also having kind of age typical experiences? Were you like doing anything that the other kids were doing, going to lessons or sports, or were you in the band or doing anything like that? Or was it kind of a very different childhood?
It was a very different childhood. I dropped out of school very, very young. I believe it was in about 8th or 9th grade. I did go to high school a little bit, but I never went to class. Like, I went there for like an appearance type thing. So,
grace everybody with your presence a little bit.
Basically, yeah. So there was I didn't have a lot of school experience. My mom went to prison when I was young. And first she started going to jail a lot, and then she ended up going to prison, and I ended up moving out on my own. I think I was like 14 or 15.
Wow.
How do you pull that off when you're 14?
I moved in first. So first I moved in with I want to say like a family friend, but I mean, now I say it because I'm in recovery and they were really my friend. But back then I thought she was a really good person in my life, and I moved in with her, and I used with her. She was an older lady, and I used drugs with her. And I ended up doing that for a while, and then I ended up getting my own place. From my dad being killed, I received Social Security. And so those funds were administered to my grandparents, and then they helped me pay for my place. So it kind of went like that. And then I ended up selling drugs. Like, my friends were older people. They were my mom's friends or people I sold drugs to, because that's what I started doing to survive. Is like, I know how to take care of myself this way.
Basically, you went into the family business.
Basically. I hate saying it like that because my mom's such a good person. And I just want to reiterate that, like, she did what she used the skills that she had at the time. And I say that because, yeah.
I mean, I get what you're saying. I mean, this is not a podcast to talk about your mom.
Yeah.
And you've got to own your own stuff, you know, and you did what you knew. And I don't think you're a bad person or a bad mom, but you know, what you're talking about your mom is what was happening to you. And so you were doing the best what you could do, and you were surviving, and that's all you knew. And then you found out a different way. But before we get to that, I mean, 15, 16, living on your own, selling drugs, hanging out with an older crowd, that can't be good.
It was never good. But for some reason I was able to not get in trouble. Like, I didn't catch my first set of charges until, long story short, let's back up. So I did meth for a while. And then I started going to the doctor. I knew somebody, they're like, hey, we know a doctor that you can go to that's going to write you tons of scripts to make money, because money was part of my addiction. I ended up going into this doctor. It was $200 a visit. And he would write you any script you wanted. And it started there. I didn't use pain pills at the time. I was just selling them to people. And then I started taking them. And that's where my life really got out of control.
Which is crazy to say, because you're 16, selling meth, started at 12 and living on your own. And then you say your life really got out of control.
I think that's where the physical addiction came in, though, with the pain pills. Like, the meth addiction was fast money, a fast life. I could just sleep it off if I needed to, like, at that time. But when I started doing the pain pills is where it really took over. It controlled me. I wouldn't wake up in the morning unless everything revolved around making sure I had pain pills for the next day.
And how old were you when this started going?
I want to say about 19, 20 years old when I got into the pain pills.
And how young a lady are you now?
I am 37.
Okay. And so, I mean, you've had a long run at this.
Yeah.
And in between there, you had a couple kids.
Yeah, I had my daughter. So I was in abusive relationships and stuff like that. And that's just what I seen. My mom was always in relationships. I didn't know what that looked like. So I was in an unhealthy relationship, and I ended up getting pregnant with my daughter. And while I was pregnant with her, I was still taking pain pills. I ended up convincing my doctor to start prescribing them to me while I was pregnant. And that's how I was able to justify it. She came out very healthy. She's awesome. After I had her, I started selling pain pills, selling meth again, and then getting pregnant with my son. When my son was, I hate talking, but yeah, but when my son was 8 months old, he ended up getting a hold of meth and overdosing on it. My kids were taken from by the state for my actions, and as much as it kills me, or how some people think that your kids are going to keep you sober, or you need to do it for your kids, I was still getting high after that happened. The drugs are more powerful. Like, it took me about 6 months to get into rehab to get my kids back, and they were about to relinquish my rights. And I finally ended up, why I struggled with getting into rehab is because I couldn't get a clean UA. The pills had taken over. Like, I couldn't function without them. The state's like, don't you want your kids? And I wanted my kids more than anything, but your brain convinces you that what you're doing is okay. It took me a long time to get into treatment, but I ended up going to House of Hope for the first time. And I ended up staying there for about 9 months, but I was able to get my kids back. And after I got out of treatment, I ended up using again. And I believe now, after thinking about it, is the reason I started using again is because I was doing it for everybody else. I was doing it because people told me that's what I needed to do. No one ever asked me, do you want to be a mom, or do you want to do this? They just asked me, well, when are you going to get your kids back? So I did jumped through the hoops and everything to get them back. And I ended up going back out after I got out of treatment, and I went really hard for like 3 years. I caught 12 felonies.
Where did your kids go when you went back out?
They were with me.
And it's interesting, and maybe Dr. Matt can speak on this, but when we started the podcast, we were a little lighthearted, and we were having some fun banter back and forth, and we were getting into your story and even joking a little bit about your story. Mm-hmm. But as soon as you said your son overdosed and you brought your kids into your story, your demeanor completely changed. I can see it in your face. I can hear it in your voice. And it seems that this is the toughest part about it for you.
Yeah, because before it was just me that it affected. Well, I thought it was just me that it affected. And in the moment when I was putting them through that, it's weird how your brain works, but I didn't think I was affecting them in a bad way. Like, it's so weird how the brain convinces you of different things. But that's just what I knew. Like, I was justifying me selling drugs because I was using that money to make sure my kids were fed or taken care of.
Which is the model that you had growing up, right?
Yeah,
it's like you said, growing up, you knew that drugs was the culture in the family and the income in the family. And consequently, you had the nice things that are important to a kid, like nice clothes and a place to stay and good food. And so it would have been easy for your brain to justify, use denial as a coping mechanism to continue in doing that same thing, because honestly, that's the model you'd been given growing up.
Yeah. One thing I did learn from that relapse when I relapsed after getting out of treatment is I remember exactly how it happened to the T. Like, I had an abscessed tooth. My face was swollen up. I was in a severe pain, and I ended up calling my mom at like 1:30 in the morning saying, like, what am I going to do? I need to get into a dentist. And she's like, well, I have a pain pill. And I don't think she put two and two together either. But as soon as I knew that she was bringing me that pill, I was already high. Everything went away. Like, I was already planning on how I was going to get some for the next day. And that's before that pill even entered my system. Like, I knew right then how big of an addict I was.
That's insane. I want to go back to, when you were saying it was just you. but you realized it wasn't just you now that in recovery.
Yeah.
There was a lot of times when I would sit and I would talk to my ex-wife, or I would talk to my mom, or I would talk to my brothers, or I'd talk to loved ones, and they're like, you got to slow your drinking down. And I go, what do you care? This is me. It's my body. I'm not making you drink. I'm not forcing you. You live your life. Let me live my life. You don't get to say what I get to do. That's the one thing about being me, is you don't get to tell me what to do. And now in recovery, like you, looking back, it wasn't just me.
Yeah.
It was all the people that supported me to get me here. It's all my family. It's all the jobs who put money in to promote me, to give me the skills that I have and all that stuff. And now I'm working in that wake of damage and trying to build those bridges again and do that. And so that's what's crazy about it. You're so right. The brain is so powerful, and it will justify, it will rationalize.
Yep.
Just to get that next fix. And then you tell yourself, as soon as I get this fix, I'm going to go back and work on those problems. But you never do. You never do. Because
I had good intentions too.
I'll tell you what, some of the addicts out there have the best intentions in the world. That's why they always say, love the addict, hate the disease. Yeah. And it's not about making a bad person good. It's about making a sick person well. And it sounds like you had another run and you were out there for, did you say 3 years?
Yeah, so it was close to 3 years. When I went back out, I had lost everything super quick that I had built from getting in treatment. I got out and I got a house. When my dad was killed, we got a trust fund. So my dad was electrocuted. And I received part of this trust fund the day after I graduated residential treatment the first time. Not a good setup, not a good mix at all. And my treatment team was working with me like, hey, you need to be careful with this money. You need to be smart. And I ended up getting me a brand new car and getting the stuff that we needed. Within 3 months of me relapsing, I had lost everything.
Wow.
That's how fast it consumed me. I went out harder than I ever did before. And I think that's how most addicts worked. Like each time you go back out, it gets a little bit worse. It got really bad. We were homeless. I was living in hotels with my kids, living on people's couches. It went from my drug addiction being a glamorous life to getting super ugly when I went back out. And I knew what I wanted. This is where it goes. I knew I wanted something different this time. I knew I wanted to get help for me. I wanted something more than anything ever. I wanted to learn how to be a good mom. I wanted stability for them. But I couldn't get sober again to get myself back in treatment. I started going to jail at least once a month. I think I had 12 booking photos in the matter of a couple months. And when my booking photos started, I started with them where I was crying when I'd get arrested. And at the end, I was smiling. And it was because I could catch a break for a minute. I had time to breathe when I went to jail. As effed up as that sounds, it was almost like a sense of relief. I ended up going to
from your own behavior, right?
Yeah, because it was just so much. I was constantly on the run. My mind was constantly busy and racing and trying to figure out what I was going to do next.
So jail became a timeout for you. I mean, yeah. Where you could you get 3 hots in a cot, as they say.
I could get some sleep, even though I was so worried about my kids. And of course, you don't want to go to jail. I mean, I was so scared about the detox, but when I went to jail, the detox wasn't nearly as bad as it was when I was outside of jail.
Because you knew there was nothing you could do.
Yeah, I couldn't have access to anything. So I ended up starting to call House of Hope again when I was out running the streets. And I'm telling them, I need some help. I'm I really want it this time. I had no one ordering me to go to court, so it was a little bit harder back then to get into treatment. And because
but you got to stop right there, because that's the craziest thing in my mind, Dr. Matt. Look at this. She's out on the street. Nobody's ordering her to go to rehab, and it's harder to get in. Yeah. This is someone wanting to get their life changed, to get their in order and move forward. But it's harder to get in on your own heart than it is with a court order.
Right. And that's, it's an improving situation in the state of Utah and around the country, but I think it comes from a long line of seeing addiction as a choice, as a bad behavior, as immoral, And now so many people are working so hard to help change that culture so that we understand that it's a disease and that it doesn't require punishment. Punishment does not cure addiction, but treatment does. And so we have some programs now where people can, like drug court, and people can be ordered into treatment. But she's absolutely right. The tragedy is that so many people feel so lost even today. How do I get myself into treatment? How do I get enough stability to get in? How do I pay for it? So there are a lot of folks like myself who really advocate for more programs like drug court, where we can put money, state money, towards helping people get in and get clean and sober, as opposed to just giving them 3 hots and a cot, which is a nice little timeout break, but doesn't fix the problem at all. And so it's in a way wasted resources.
So
there's a big change now. I notice it's a lot easier to get into treatment now than it has ever been. So it is,
but that's only been in the last, I'd say, 5 to 10 years at the most.
Yeah, I was thinking like the last 3 even. So
yeah, we're making tremendous progress here in the state of Utah and many other states as well. But there's a lot more that can be done.
So Heidi, you say this time it's different. You want to get your life back. You want to learn how to become a better mom, as you say, give your kids a stable life that they deserve. But you're having a little resistance in getting into a treatment center. Where do you go from there?
So since I had already built that relationship with House of Hope from the first time being there, I ended up calling them, and I knew her name was Christine Moore, but she ran their admissions department. And I'd call her, and she's like, "Hey, let me know when you're ready." And be like, "Okay, I'll let you know." And then I'd go to jail. And I kept going to jail, or when it was my time to check in, I was in jail. So I ended up getting sentenced to, I think it was like 90 days in jail the last time. And I got out on ankle monitor. I actually had the dope man put his address out there, and it got approved for me to move into. And while I was in ankle monitor, I ended up staying sober off of meth the whole time I was there. But I ended up selling some pills to make some money. And I hadn't touched them for the first couple weeks. And somehow my brain convinced me that I'm like, okay, I'm going to take one of these pills and I'm going to do it. And my form of doing pills was I snorted them. And I had crushed up this pill that day, and I started sniffing half of it. And it was the first time I was ever able to stop myself in the middle of it and say, "What are you doing, Heidi? Like, are you going to throw everything away?" And that's the last time I used. I stopped in the middle of it. I remember wiping it off the counter. And right there was like my aha moment. They say like God takes over, you have that awakening. And I knew right then I was done.
Somebody flipped your switch.
Yep. There was just that feeling came over me. Like, I am so done with this. 4 days later, this is what's so weird. 4 days later, I got drug tested for the work crew at the jail. And I thought for sure I was clean. I could get myself clean way before that. And I tested positive. And I ended up going to jail and being placed on a 30-day lockdown. It's where you can't have any phone calls or visitors or anything. And out of nowhere, they told me to roll up on my 29th day. And it was House of Hope there to pick me up. I still get very emotional. Like, it was like, I remember going into treatment, and when you're checking into House of Hope, you have to sit up at the top of the stairs waiting for your UA. And everyone knows, like, there's the new person. Like, are they going to pass their UA to get into treatment? And I was sitting there and I was smiling ear to ear. And I remember a girl passing me. She's like, "Why are you so happy to be here?" I'm like, "Because I've never wanted something so bad." And it was like, I went to treatment. I went in there and met with them, and they're out doing your assessments and everything. They're like telling me what I needed to do and stuff. And I went in there, I'm like, I know what I need to do. Like the first time I went to treatment, they told me the only way I was ever going to stay sober is if I didn't have any contact with my mom. And I just agreed with it because that's what I thought they wanted to hear. And I went in there and I'm like, I need you guys to teach me how to keep myself safe when I do have contact with my mom, because it's not realistic for me never to have contact with her. I need you to teach me boundaries so I know not to cross them with her. So we came up with like a safety plan if she was to start coming into my life again. I needed them to teach me how to make me feel like I was worth it. I needed them to teach me how to hold people accountable. I needed them to and I went in there with my own treatment plan because I had thought about it, like what I needed to do differently. Because I wasted a year of mine and my kids' life the first time. And I went in there and I did my program and I did it 100% honest. At that time, when I went back in, they told me that you were no longer allowed to smoke in a treatment center. And that threw me way off. Like the first time I went there, you could smoke. And so I ended up breaking some rules with smoking when I'd go on pass. But before I left there, we were in a house meeting and I just stood up out of nowhere in the meeting and like, I've been smoking on pass. And everyone's looking at me like, and I'm like, I need to know I'm leaving here being 100% honest. Because part of my addiction was lying. It just came naturally. It's what I was taught. I would lie even when the truth sounded better. So I went in there and I did all that stuff and I worked a really honest program. And when I had left treatment before the first time, I went back to the same environment. Like I went back out and I got a house, yes, but I was still around the same people. And that's why I feel like I kind of went back into those old behaviors because you kind of adapt. When I was leaving House of Hope, they told me about the Family Support Center's LifeStart Village. And a lot of people had some things to say, like, you're going to go to another program or you're going to go to do this. And I'm like, I'm open to anything because I had lost everything. I literally had one black garbage bag of mine and my kids' stuff with us. I had nothing. I had 12 felonies on my record. I've never really held a job. I had no life skills. And they told me about LifeStart and I ended up going there when I got out of treatment. And I have been here ever since.
We're going to find out a little bit about that in a second. But I want to go back to the second time you went to House of Hope. Because what I love is that you went in, and it kind of goes back, Dr. Matt, to the sponsor of this podcast, Know Your Script. You went in there with what you needed to know, and you were still receptive to what they were willing to teach, but you said, this is what's going to be my life. I remember when I was in recovery, and they said, well, you can't be around people that drink. And I go, well, I'm a DJ, and that's not going to work. And if all you're telling me to do is take a right turn every time there's alcohol, I'm just going to be walking in circles my whole life. We've got to figure out how I can stay clean for me and set the boundaries and all that. And so Dr. Matt, that's what I love is that she was an advocate for her own program and she was willing to listen, but also take control of her recovery.
Well, in listening to what she's saying, to me, becoming an advocate for herself, her own program, was a result of that insight, of that epiphany that she really wanted to change. She wiped it off the counter. She knew she was done. She knew she had to change. And at that moment, she went from being passive to active. Being a proactive person gets us where we want to go in life. Being a passive person is sort of like you're on the waves, and sometimes you get lucky and sometimes you don't. And a lot of people go in to any kind of treatment, whether it's a routine surgery or recovery center, and they go in a passive way, and they just expect the doctors and the staff to do all the right things for them. But that passivity is sort of like giving yourself, wiggle room to be tossed on the waves of life. And maybe I will go back to using, and I just don't know. I guess we'll see how good the doctors here are. Well, when you go in with that proactive attitude, I know what I want. I may not know all the ways to get it, but I'm going to advocate for myself. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to tell people what I want, what I need, what I think. Now you're taking charge and you're rowing the boat. You're not just getting tossed around on the waves. Mm-hmm. And that's like a 180. That the difference is tremendous. And so, it is born out of that insight that a person often has. Sometimes we call it a rock bottom. And in your case, it just sounded like sort of an epiphany. You had this epiphany of, I just don't want to be this way anymore. And so that shift from being passive in your treatment to being active in your treatment is tremendous. And anybody who's listening today, think about yourself, evaluate yourself. Am I being active or am I being passive? If you're passive, figure out, how can I make myself active in getting the recovery started? Because it's not all about, like, some people, how many times, Casey, do we get asked, like, oh, what's the best recovery center? Where should we go? What's the best one to go to? And honestly, I think both of us scratch our heads a little bit, because there are some that are great. I mean, some fantastic programs out there. But in the end, the difference is, are you going to make it work for you? Are you going to take advantage of what's there?
You're 100% right, because when I can only speak from my experience at Pinnacle Recovery, but I was in there with 16 people. And I can tell you about a fourth of them were this kind of person. Fix me.
Yeah.
I'm here for you to fix me. Just fix me. And then another fourth was in there. Hey, I'm just doing my time. I'm court ordered. I've got to get this done. If I do this, then I'm not going to do it. Another fourth was, hey, this is it, man. This is all I've got. I've got to make this work, because if not, I don't know what I'm going to do. And the other fourth knew that they were going to go back out, and that's what I loved about Heidi is you said that the first one was a waste of a year. I don't think you could say that it was a waste of a year,
no,
because you did learn things.
Yep.
You did learn things. And, when I've been in recovery, there was a guy that was next to me, and this was his 9th recovery. He'd been in 8 prior to this. And he said they were all a waste. And the therapist goes, well, no, not really. If there has to be something to recovery, or you wouldn't come back 9 times.
It's laying a foundation, right? It's laying a foundation of knowledge and desire and information. And even if you're not using all the skills, the skill base is starting to build until you finally have that insight moment, that epiphany, that then you have these skills that have built up over time.
And it made me realize, though, like I want to take that back, but it made me realize, like, when I was relapsing after I got out of there, I didn't realize it in the moment, but when I first got sober again, when I went back into house help the second time, I remember thinking, when people ask you, what led you to go back out? And I remember exactly the moment that I picked up the phone when I had that toothache. Like, I remember that whole process so clear, and it just made me, I'm fascinated with the human brain now and how fast it takes over. Like, I knew right then that I was an addict because I was high before I actually even took the substance.
And that's actually physiologically probably true.
Yeah.
Your brain can anticipate and start to release. In this case, opioid receptors are being targeted in your brain by the brain, and you're starting to get that kind of anticipatory high of feeling like, I'm going to get that pill and then I'm going to use more. And so those opiate receptors in your brain that will be, triggered by the pills you eventually take are already starting to become active in your brain. And that analgesic sort of opiate reaction is happening. And a person's like, and it's not going to last too long, but it's crazy how your brain can just already start to make that high happen.
I was already addicted before I even took it.
Yeah, we just said the exact same thing.
Yeah, I was already I hadn't even took it, and I was already worried about how I was going to come up with some of the next day.
And I could taste the beer before I even bought it, and I was like, man. And you could see a mood change in me. When I'm driving to the Maverick, woo, here they go. They're gonna be frosty cold. I'm gonna walk in that cooler. It's gonna get a little cool on my face, and man, everything's all right. But it wasn't all right. Well, Heidi,
it's crazy.
I'm loving your story, and I'm excited about talking about what you're doing now, because you said right out of House of Hope for your second time, you were willing to do whatever, because you had nothing. You had your stuff and your 2 kids' stuff all in a garbage sack. And Family Support Center was brought to you. What is the Family Support Center?
So Family Support Center offers an array of different services. So they offer a clinical team. We have the crisis nursery locations around Salt Lake that we offer free respite care for parents that are needing a break. We do an adopt.
Can just drop in anytime.
Yeah, so you can call, or you don't necessarily even have to call, but it's a respite program for any parents feeling overwhelmed, like they need a mental health break. Maybe they want to go grocery shopping without their kids. That's something I utilized it for because I already hate grocery shopping as it is, and adding my 2 kids didn't make it any kind. Yeah, it was horrible.
You get tired of telling them no.
Yeah, it wasn't even a plus. If you need to do a job interview and you have no daycare set up, or you just want some time. So we have 3 locations around Salt Lake. We have our Sugar House location, we have our West Valley location, and then we have a Midvale location. I want
to talk about your story a little bit, because when you first went there, what did you go for?
So I went to part of the Family Support Center. I came to LifeStart Village. I don't want to talk about just LifeStart, but I love Life. LifeStart is my heart and soul. LifeStart Village it's a self-sufficiency program with a housing component. So there's 46 units out here, and everyone starts in phase 1. And it's like a co-housing setup. You get your very own apartment, and it's fully furnished. You pay just a portion of your income for rent, and they teach you life skills. Like, so you come in, you get your own apartment, you have like a cook night once a week for the rest of the house, and you do a nightly chore. You have classes that you're ordered to, like not ordered, but they mandate to take. And it just helps you kind of get settled. It teaches you boundaries, a routine. So they give you enough rope to hang yourself with, I like to say, but enough to support you. So you're not allowed to have any outside visitors inside your apartment except other residents here, which was amazing for me because I struggled with boundaries with my family. Like, as soon as I started hanging out with them, I'd let them live with us, or it never ended well. Then you have other people that live here that are here to support you too. So I would go to, like, when I first moved in here, I would go to day treatment still at House of Hope, but I would live here so I could still live my normal life. And yeah, there's a lot of different stuff that goes on here.
It sounds like an amazing program, but while you were there, your kids were able to live with you.
Yes.
You found a job. You found a career. So much the fact that you never left. You're now working there.
Yeah. So I had never really worked before. So when you're in phase 1, they give you about 90 days to get a job. And I had never really had a job, so it was very hard for me to get one with 12 felonies. And I ended up finding a job at a pet salon to start off with. It was Meowser Pet Salon. I remember walking in the door and I just had enough, because nobody would hire me. And I walked in there to the lady and I'm like, listen, I have 12 felonies. I'm in recovery and I just need somebody to give me a chance. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this work. And she's like, you can start tomorrow. Her husband is in recovery, and she had never heard someone be so accountable about their recovery. And she's like, I really admire that. And still to this day, she's my biggest supporter. I worked there for about 3 years, and I used to go talk and tell my story about being involved in the system, my different experiences. And I was able to get a job through Salt Lake County as a family support specialist. And with that job came, it was amazing. I got stationed over at DCFS because that's kind of what my story came from. And I stayed there for 4 years with DCFS, advocating for parents that have substance abuse problems, helping them get into treatment and getting their kids back. And I stayed there all while I was living at LifeStart Village. And part of the program here is there's different phases, and you move phases the more you move forward in life. The more money you start making, you can move to different phases. Your rent goes up as you kind of move up in life. And I was able to move to the 3rd phase here, and it's where it's like a rent-to-own home. But I finally had got my credit score and made enough money to be able to support my kids without being on state assistance. I never got child support or anything, so it was really hard. And finally got to the point where I was able to buy my house through these guys a couple years ago. And so we still live on property, me and my kids, and it's still just us. And about 1.5 years ago, I heard that they were trying to look for an LSV director, a LifeStart Village director. I did not go to college or anything, but I had worked in that field with Salt Lake County and working with people in recovery and everything. And I'm like, well, what's the worst thing they can say? So I look up the website and I'm looking at the requirements, and it says a bachelor's degree or 5 years equivalent. And I had already had a job, and I'm like, okay, what the heck? The worst thing they can do is say no. And I turned in my resume, and they actually Indeed shot it back out because it wasn't a very good resume. Because I wasn't really thinking I was ever going to get the job. I just wanted to tell myself that I could, at least I tried. And I got a call, and they're like, we never received your resume. And I'm like, well, you guys already denied me, and I'm still trying to process why you guys didn't even give me a chance, just messing around. And they're like, come in, and we want to interview you. And after a few interviews, I ended up getting the job as the director of LifeStart Village. So I've been out here for about 1.5 years.
And how are your kids?
They're my biggest supporters. So they have grown up in the treatment kind of center atmosphere, I like to say. They went to rehab with me a couple times, and then from there we've been here the whole time. So this is all they know, and they love it. My daughter is definitely my biggest supporter. She remembers a lot of what I put her through. And so Casey, like when you were saying you from doing our gala. I think my daughter did a video for us and listening to her be brutally honest, like she is, she's always brutally honest. It still takes me back to why I never want her to go through that again. She celebrates every one of my sobriety birthdays. Like I'll be celebrating 9 years being clean and sober in April. And every year she makes me something different for me. She celebrates that more than my actual birthday. My son doesn't ever remember me drunk or high. And I'm breaking the cycle. So, and that's what my goal is with working with other people too, is like, I want people to know that you don't have to be miserable. Like you don't have to get drunk or high to get in the shower. Cause that was my life. Like I did not know that there was something so amazing out there. Things get super difficult, but as long as I keep doing the next right thing, it just works out. Like, I don't know how to explain it besides that.
I think you did an amazing job and a beautiful job of describing it. Dr. Matt, I'm amazed at Heidi's story. I think it's so wonderful and one that I think a lot of people will resonate with and get something from it. I mean, she is wonderful.
Well, I think one of the greatest things about your story is this idea of breaking intergenerational addiction.
And poverty.
And poverty. Yeah, those go hand in hand, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
And, life is hard. Like you said, things are difficult. We all hit these challenges. And it is amazing that when we face the challenge and do it in a sober way, things tend to work out for us. But I applaud you for that. And your kids are going to grow up. Your daughter remembers some of it, but I'm guessing the reason that she thinks the sobriety birthdays are more fun to celebrate than your regular birthday is because of how meaningful they are to her. And that's a lifestyle she's going to want to maintain. And your son's not growing up with any memory of that lifestyle of drug addiction. And so you are breaking that cycle. And that's probably the greatest gift a parent can give their kids is that hope for the future in that way. So, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's very inspirational. And I hope there's somebody listening today that is wondering if they can do it too. And the answer, I think, is yes.
I think the biggest thing,
Go ahead.
The biggest thing I want people to know is, like, I'm a multi-felon, okay? I didn't go to college and do all this amazing stuff. I just didn't give up. Like, I got denied for the Salt Lake County job. I had to appeal it. I had to go to a licensing committee. I had to prove that I could do it. Like, and I think a lot of people, as soon as they hear denial or say no, that they kind of just try to move on to something else. And if you know you're doing what's right, then you should fight for it, because you'd be surprised, because I've had to do it a couple times. And as long as you're willing to put in the work, I think that's what people notice. Like, 'cause I hear a lot of people like, well, I have this on my background, or I do not look good on paper. Like, or like, it's not pretty. I mean, I don't even qualify to get my stuff expunged. I have to go get a pardon. Okay. Like, it's not, and I don't know, just don't give up, because it's so worth it. Like, when I no longer received food stamps, like, my kids used to celebrate the 15th of every month. Okay. Because that's what was exciting to them. And just for them not to look forward to, I mean, and I don't know. It's just weird how things work out as long as you keep trying. So
I think it's weird. I think it's beautiful. I think it's amazing. And your energy and your glow is infectious. And I applaud everything that you've ever done. And I think you're doing wonderful things. If people want to find out more about the Family Support Center and everything they have to offer, where do they go?
So they go to familysupportcenter.org. And when you go to our website, there's it will show all the different services that we have to offer, and you can just click on them. If you want to know more information about LifeStart, if you click on LifeStart, and it kind of goes through how the program works, and there's also applications to turn in if you're looking for something.
Well, thank you very much for stopping by and sharing your story today. We appreciate it. Dr. Matt, it's been a great episode. I'm really excited for the people to hear this one.
Absolutely. We'll call this the Winston Churchill episode. Never, ever give up.
Yeah, I love that. Hey, you're listening to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction, more importantly, about recovery, brought to you by our friends at useonlyasdirected.org, or as we say now, knowyourscript.org. See, I almost messed it up, but then I just kept going.
You didn't give up. You stuck with it.
That's right. Hey, don't forget, Project Recovery is a KSL podcast.
The contents of this program are for informational purposes only. The program is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this program. KSL does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the program. Reliance on any information provided on the program is solely at your own risk.
2 years ago, Americans watched in horror as a crisis unfolded at the Kabul airport.
There's desperation and anguish.
More than 80,000 Afghans have since arrived in America, but this story is still unfolding. I'm Andrea Smartin. In my new podcast, Stranger Becomes Neighbor, we'll find out what happens to these new arrivals in our communities. Who would help our newest neighbors? Follow us at kslpodcast.com, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen.